You guys applauded that, so I guess I'm already done. Of course, I'm in a room full of Rails developers, so you guys already know TDD is dead because DHH blessed it with his hair gel and said so it's all fine. We can all go home now. So as Latoya said, I am Eric Smith. I'm Director of Training Services at 8th Light for now. I have 15 minutes. I may be looking for gainful employment, so please find me later. But why do I have a talk at TDD is crap? Well, those of you that have not already abandoned TDD because DHH gave you permission have probably been to 1 or 2 conferences in your time or seen a few videos online. And you've probably seen a guy who will go unnamed start folding his arms and stomping across the screen and jutting his chin out. And then he looks at the audience and says, "The debate is over. TDD has won. You are not a professional if you do not write unit tests." Now, it's interesting because if you were to find him later, and again, I'm not going to name names, but he's not your uncle despite rumors to the contrary, he will probably be willing to pair program with you. And if you see him, he will immediately flip open his MacBook because he works on a Mac. Now, I see a lot of Macs in the audience because that's the Ruby on Rails blessed computer. Does anybody remember when Xcode came out, when the iOS was released and the NDA got lifted and we could all write for iPhone, what the unit testing framework that came with Xcode was? There wasn't one because it wasn't supported. And despite that, we all loved our iPhones. We all love our Mac OS, even though they don't write any unit tests for it. So I guess that operating system is completely unprofessional, and you guys should all switch to Linux. Except Linux doesn't use TDD. Linux doesn't have unit tests either. So I guess you guys can all switch to Windows, because they have TDD built into Visual Studio. I assume you'll be buying it out the door. But if you continue forward and attempt to pair program, you'll probably then sit down and write Closure. Now, those of you that are familiar with Rich Hickey, the developer of Closure's opinion on it, he believes TDD is, quote, stupid. That it is people banging cars off guardrails just to make sure they don't screw up, and that you should go sit in a hammock for a while. Well, that doesn't really work either, but we'll get into that. TDD means being a professional as long as you use an unprofessional operating system, an unprofessional programming language, and maybe unprofessional editors like IntelliJ, which also doesn't use unit tests. Eclipse does, but nobody likes that editor. The truth is, TDD is a thing that consultants like me push out there because we want to sell you something. It's our job. We have to make a living. We all got to eat too, right? And TDD has 4 key points, 4 things we brag about, right? And the first one is you'll have less bugs. You might have no bugs. Some people who promote TDD will say there's no bugs in our code, which is weird because most of you probably have unit tests, and I bet you have bugs. Well, the truth of the matter is fewer bugs than what? Has anybody ever seen a comparison of test-driven development to other methods? No, there's about 6 or 7 of them. Okay, we got one hand. I've done a little bit of looking on this. People usually compare college students, 8 or 12 of them, to other college students, 8 or 12 of them, and tell them to write unit tests. So yes, you will have less bugs than people who don't know what they're doing yet. Right, so congratulations. But we've never really proven this. In fact, if you think about it, test-driven development is something that's adopted later in a programmer's career. Nobody starts with a unit test, which means we know that people who have been programming longer write fewer bugs. We hope, right? Furthermore, most bugs are at the interaction level. We know this, and TDD is not good at writing tests where classes interact. Finally, and this is maybe the most important part, you know how many bugs in test code people who don't write tests find? None. It's a divide by 0 error. So naturally, they have less bugs because we have twice as much code to debug. I'm sure everyone here can tell me a horror story of the time they spent hours trying to get something to work only to find that the bug was in the test, or has told their product owner, well, I'm done, but the tests don't pass, but the code works, right? We have no proof, no evidence that TDD produces fewer bugs. We just have a few people that think it does. That's all we got. But then usually, the second step is I'm faster with TDD. Because after You've convinced someone that they should write unit tests all the time. They come up with the completely reasonable question of how are you going to be faster if you're writing all these unit tests? And usually I say something like, well, I'm faster because as I go, all my code is clean and I know everything behind me is still working. Except I don't, because I haven't really proven I don't have bugs in my older code. Except I don't, because I might have bugs in the tests I've been writing. But the most important thing, maybe, is that when you guys go home and you really want to figure something out and you want to bang out something quick, do you write tests or do you do a spike? Yeah, we all do a spike because we've got a little excuse. We gave it a fancy name so that we can go ahead and not write tests because we know that we're faster at that point. But okay, fine, that's spike code. What about production code? Test-driven development evangelist. Ignore maintenance. Anybody here ever spent a day trying to debug CI? A week? Anybody ever had a team that's job it is to fix continuous integration machines because they're all broken? You know, if you've got 1,000 tests, isn't daylight savings time great? Right, yeah. Oh, but you know, we're faster with TDD as long as we ignore old tests, reading tests, maintaining tests, fixing the tests written by that moron who was probably you. In addition to having no proof, we've given ourselves an enormous quantity of work. We often say code is a liability, yet we continue to create voluntary liability that nobody actually needed. But now I know some of you are looking at me right now. You're already thinking it, right? You're like, yeah, Eric, it doesn't produce less bugs, and it's not about going faster because testing is about design, right? Right? It's not really a testing technique. Good thing we put test right in the title. But if it's not a testing technique, how is it a design technique? Oh, well, test-driven development makes your designs better. Why? Because they're more testable. That's a circle. Right? Congratulations, you've used circular reasoning to prove your designs are better because they're more testable, even though we admit it's not about testing. Developers are nothing if not capable of confusing themselves to the point where they agree with themselves. Loosely coupled code with mock objects everywhere, so we don't know if anything works. Test-driven development causes pain sometimes, right? You know, DHH called this test-driven development, oh, what did he call it? The TDD pains, the TDD essentially mistakes, right? You start breaking encapsulation. You start building up more overcomplicated designs. You start adding interfaces where an if statement would do. You start taking Rails and redesigning it to have services and other things and other stuff. So you can test everything individually and now have no idea if anything works. Oop, too far. Furthermore, we have no objective measure, right? We don't know what the good design means yet. We have some guidelines. We have some principles. Principles we made up just like we made up TDD. So we've got 3 points. Less bugs? No, well, not really. A lot of code to fix. Faster? Heck no. It's about design. Design of what? So what's the last thing we do? Well, we say, well, it's more fun. Right? Because after all, the person who's paying you gobs of money because we are in a profession where we make a really good living really cares if you're having a good time. If you want to have more fun, play ping pong at lunch. Right? You know why people do test-driven development half the time? Because they want to dive into the code. How many people can write a UML diagram anymore? How many people spend time doing upfront design? Maybe you don't actually have to lay in a hammock. But do you spend any time designing your systems anymore? Or you just dive in? Because testing feels so good. It feels like real work. I wrote myself some unit tests. I got some tests going. Yay! I had fun, right? Sure, I've written twice as much code that other people have to maintain. Sure, I've made this overcomplicated design. Sure that the test maintenance and everything else is just going to blow everything out the window in terms of timelines later. But at least I had a good time writing my bowling game. The fact is, most of the time we have more fun, especially when we're doing practice of TDD, when we're learning the skill. We're doing the same problem over and over again, and we're getting better at it. Just like anything else can be fun if you get better at it. People willingly go out and jog 5 miles every day because it's fun. It might not be fun for you, But getting better at something repeatedly is more fun. And it's not really relevant to what we're doing at our job. And you know what's not fun? Maintaining CI. Telling the product owner that the code isn't finished yet because I've got to spend the next couple of days debugging tests. Paying for tons of machines so we can run all these tests. Right? Big systems, they end up with like swaths of them. None of that's fun. Well, so I've clearly convinced all of you permanently never to write another unit test. So that's good. But what are our alternatives? Break more stuff? Well, first of all, we need to start looking into alternatives. Once someone becomes test infected, much like once someone gets infected with capital A Agile and starts telling everyone Scrum solves everything, or Lean solves everything, well, they start to forget there's other ways to prove your software works. All right? Those of you that are out there now, design by contract is a term that's I first read in the Pragmatic Programmer book before those guys were doing TDD. Before they were writing the Pickaxe book and the Agile Web Development with Rails book, they were saying you should use design by contract. Design by contract has done some empirical studies and done really well for itself. You should go out and take a look at yourself in the programming language Eiffel, which is written by Bertrand Meyer, one of the original OO people. Did you know with a system that you specified with design by contract, you can actually prove it works? You can have the system look at all the assertions you built into your code, simple to write assertions rather than these large setup tests that we have to figure out, and run a little program and it'll say, yep, it works. It meets all the assertions you wrote. Now, you may argue correctly that that doesn't mean it'll solve every single problem that you didn't think of, which is also true in test-driven development. That's what Quick Check is for. I put the programming languages up here because these are things you should look into. Right? Haskell has built into it property-based testing. It's in other languages too. Actually, both of those two things have ports written in Ruby. Right? Property-based testing throws tons of test scenarios at your code, well more than you'll ever think of. But we don't do that. These things aren't as much fun as writing unit tests are. But I joke about ham development. Spend some time doing some upfront design. We rejected big upfront design in part because it's boring. And that is truly unprofessional. Right? It's dull to sit with Post-it notes. But it's important. It needs to be done sometimes. And finally, every organization has an actual QA department. If TDD was this silver bullet, we wouldn't need it. Right? Now, I have 2 minutes left. This is the part where I admit I'm kidding about some of this stuff. Right? The test-driven development's a fad. The question is it a fad like the pet rock, or is it a fad like jogging? Because in the 70s, jogging was a fad. Now it's a thing we do because it's good for you. Pet rocks went away. I'd argue it's more like jogging. But maybe it's very much like fitness fads in that every fitness fad leads to the next even better one. In a minute and 38 seconds, I'm going to leave and head on over to the 8th Light booth. We're going to do some mob programming, and we're going to write unit tests, and we're going to do TDD because that's how we develop software, because like democracy, that's the best way I know how to write software for now. But we need to stop doing things like downloading the code and then going, oh my God, there's no tests. Because we use excellent software every day that doesn't have those kind of tests. We need to stop sounding quite so strident about what perfection is in software, because we're nowhere close to it. I do TDD now. I probably won't do it in 10 years because I will have found something better. I will have moved on to whatever is an improvement on top of TDD. And if you're not looking at the alternatives, both in the past and in the future, eventually you're going to be the one sitting in the audience while someone on stage calls you unprofessional for only writing these silly unit tests. All right. I'm Eric Smith again, formerly Director of Training Services at 8th Light. We'll be over there doing some mob programming in a few minutes. You can also find me and tell me I'm stupid on Twitter, right? Or you can find my website and tell me I'm stupid. No, you can't. I don't have comments enabled. So you can probably track me down, though. If you find Peyton Rules, it's me. I warn you, if you follow me on Twitter right now, you are going to get nothing but Cubs tweets until October 29th, because that's the game for the World Series that the Cubs will be winning to finally end 108 years. Thanks.